Thank you. Good evening. It's really great to be here. So thanks so much to Andrea for the opportunity to do so, because I haven't looked at my PhD research for a few years. So it's always fun to pull out something that you spent a lot of time, blood and sweat and tears investing in for many years. And I think it's really relevant. So I'm really excited to share that with you. And also, as Andrea said, Jane Goodall is someone who passed away recently, if you hadn't heard that. But she was in her 90s, 91, I believe, and she actually was just, we had just crossed paths in New York City. I was there in September for the annual Climate Week, which coincides with the UN General Assembly that I used to attend years ago when I was working for the UN. So Jane Goodall was actually at one of the panels and presenting, and one of my colleagues saw her speak. And so that was, I think, a highlight for her life. I had actually seen Jane speak a few different times in my life, so that was a blessing, and I'm excited to share a little bit about that with you this evening. Do you want to hit the slides, Andrew?
I do.
Please?
Thank you.
Excellent. And I guess I could say I currently am splitting my time between living in Minneapolis and living in Duluth. So I'm an ocean girl. I used to do a lot of marine conservation, marine biodiversity conservation. But now my ocean is Lake Superior. And but I love that lake so much. So today I am going to hopefully tie together the threads of some of what you read this past week through this super cool book, I think, the Green Saints book, and also tie it with a lot of ideas around this theme of the sacred connection to Earth, which is part of the connection I built with some Aboriginal Australians and then Jane's work as well. But first, if you want to move to the next slide, this is how we're going to structure the next hour and a half for everyone in the room and online. I'll give a little bit of an introduction to the topic, and then we'll do some sharing in pairs for those of you here and at home. And then I'll give some insights from my dissertation work that did take place in Australia between 2013 and 2018. And then I'll do a small group exercise, and then I'll talk about Jane Goodall's message of hope. And then we'll have a large group discussion. And we'll see if we can pack all of that in. And there's also a little bit of a take-home exercise as well. So everyone will have access to the slides. And if we have time, I'll introduce you to that as well, just so that you can carry some of tonight into the rest of your life. So I wanted to spend a few minutes just reflecting a little bit on some call-outs from the two chapters that were part of the background reading for this week. And these are just a few of the quotes that had come out, or some of the elements that felt like they resonated with this theme of the sacred connection to Earth. And the first one I think is just really interesting is from this astronaut who I hadn't actually heard of before, but just what I recall seeing and hearing for years about astronauts is this kind of transformational experience they have when they leave Earth and they see this planet from space. And I just can't imagine what that must be like. But I don't think anyone has that experience without realizing what an incredible planet Earth that we live on. This green living planet is just phenomenal. And it's why I chose to study biology, the study of life. When I was a kid, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, because I just thought, wow, this world is so incredibly amazing. Like, how cool to study it. So I really liked this quote from this astronaut talking about the feelings of wonder and awe of seeing Earth from space transformed into a humble recognition of global interconnectedness with all people and living things. And that's a theme that will carry into some of what I'll share about Jane Goodall in a little bit. And what's also really interesting to me about these chapters is that they also refer to, and I imagine you probably already discussed this in the weeks leading up to today, Laudato Si, the encyclical from Pope Francis. And here's just one small tidbit from that amazing document about it's a true, I'll just start that again. A true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. And that's something that I learned years ago as well. After I was teaching in Belize, I was teaching at a high school in Belize, and I had studied my biology degree. And that whole experience just put people squarely back into the equation of the study of life. Can't just be about every other thing besides us. And it's something that's been very much a part of my career since then. And it'll be part of what I share from my dissertation with you, this idea that to really truly understand and find ways to help address the crises we have in the environment, we need to be working with people. We need to have a social approach. We need to be measuring what impacts are happening socially in addition to ecologically. So those two really struck me thinking about what to share this week with you. And then I just picked a couple of things from each of the two chapters and the two saints, whether they're canonized or uncanonized, from the chapters this week. The first one, Marguerite, where in the chapter it talks about the fact that, and this is in the 17th century, that she's a witness for modern readers of uncompromising anti-consumerism, which is just great. She served the poor while being deeply embedded in nature. So we'll talk a little bit in our exercise today about practices around that. And then Sister Paula Gonzalez, as the book noted, is considered an uncanonized ecological saint. And I liked that. In part, from some of the indicators they were talking about in the chapter, that she had frequent immersion in nature and also found an awareness of divinity in nature. So we'll talk about those two in a couple minutes. So what we're going to do now is do some sharing, and if you're not equally paired up, you can have trios or whatnot. And then online as well, connect with at least one other person and do a couple of these things based on what we just talked about. Some of these themes from the readings this week. Describe a place in nature to which you feel most connected. And it might be a place that you love to go visit. It might be a place right outside your door. It might be a place you walk to every day. But share that with your neighbor. And then also share an experience from a time when you felt divinity in nature. And again, you may have 1,000 experiences of this or even more, but pick one. And let's just take a few minutes to share those with someone else.
How long do you want me to?
How about 5 minutes?
Okay, 5 minutes Zoom, folks.
Do you have a favorite spot
It is among trees, especially trees that are canopy.
Oh, yes.
Over me, it's a sense of, there's a different feeling
Yeah.
among the trees. And
Yeah.
the special place, there's actually two Have you ever been to Muir Woods in California?
Oh, yeah.
John Muir.
John Muir, yeah, Muir.
So it's Muir Woods, I think. And I just felt a reverence in that place.
Yeah.
And then,
Very understandable.
and then the second
I'm interested in sharing either of your experiences, telling us about a place where you feel very connected to nature. Anyone? Are you tracking online, folks?
Yeah, folks online, raise your Zoom hand or your real hand if you've got something to share.
Anyone in the room want to share? Or you could share about an experience when you felt divinity in nature. Either question. Anyone want to share? Excellent.
Pam and I have never met, but we both talked about the Mississippi. She talked about the part up on, well, that Highway 61 and then the Mississippi up north. And then I talked about it down toward Winona, and especially this time of year, because it is just so gorgeous.
Mhm.
Oh, that's wonderful. It is an amazing river. How about you?
I was sharing with Annie that when I was a little girl, maybe 3 or 4, I think, but very little. And we had a swing in a great big tree. And I could push myself and swing on the swing. And so one day I looked like this when I was swinging. I leaned way back and I could see the umbrella of the tree. And I remember that so vividly. And it was just like I was transported,
Thank you so much for sharing those examples. Does anyone online want to share?
Oh, I see a hand. Christine.
Christine, how about you?
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I feel like all I have to do is look out my window. If I look out my back window, I've got a red maple and a gold maple. And if I look out the front window, there's other beautiful trees and then the valley. It's like, it feels like there's beauty and nature all around us. And I feel so grateful. And then the other place is whenever I'm looking at the stars, just seeing the stars do their thing at night is always a sense of divinity.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Trees, stars, water, rivers, they're all just incredible reminders of our sacred connection to this world. Something that I thought was super interesting about the Mississippi, as an aside, I was just giving, well, actually, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, so never mind. Hold that thought. You can move to the next slide, Andrea.
Oh,
So
I got yep.
So if there's anything else you want to talk about that you read this week, we can talk about that after the end, but I have a lot of content here that I'm excited to get into. So one of the things I'd like to share before getting into the other elements around my dissertation and Jane Goodall is just giving a little bit of an introduction to the current biodiversity crisis. And I can't imagine that you can be living today and not being aware of this, but especially those of you who have tracked more of this over the course of your lives have even more to note, I'm sure. You can share the next
Makeup
slide.
artist who doesn't love traditional foundation. That's why I
In the work that I've done for many years, I used to work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for the Bureau of Land Management, for the Nature Conservancy. And then I went and lived overseas in England for many years and worked for the United Nations Environment Program. And one of our big partners was World Wildlife Fund and the Zoological Society of London. And those two organizations produced this thing called the Living Planet Report, which is based on the Living Planet Index. They update this every 2 years. And if you have any interest in this, you can, I know the slides will be shared with you, and I've got all the links for these resources in the slides. This one, it's just been updated in 2024, but the 2022 report was kind of a landmark year because there was a lot of UN activity taking place that year to figure out the next 10 years of goals and targets being set for the world. But one of the findings that came out from this tracking since 1970, I think is what's hidden under that last little image.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So for 50 years, the Living Planet Index, thank you, has been tracking populations of species. And in those 50 years, the average species, the numbers of species in that population have decreased by 70%. So it's just really significant. And if you can break this down by region, if you're interested, there's been less loss in the US and North America because it was more destroyed before those 50 years were starting to be recorded. Whereas in Latin America, you'll see a much steeper decline because those have been more recently higher quality and extent of biodiversity. So in general, the problem, as you can see, is being tracked. It's stabilizing a little bit as well, and there's a lot of efforts to try to reverse biodiversity loss. Honestly, I don't know how we'll be able to do that, but hope has changed those. Lots of different ways that we can try to do this, but it's a big problem.
Is that counting insects?
That is a great question, and it should be counting insects. It should be counting different mammals, plants, bugs, insects, all of these different living beings. The problem with some of that is that we don't know as much about certain species around the planet. So there's definitely always a lack of information for some families of species. And then this is just all of that data thrown into one bucket for all of them. We know the most about mammals.
Now, you're not talking about species that have been extinguished, but just the percentage of each population for each species. And what I would say is interesting about this is I bet you one species that has increased during this time is the human species. And
Yes, these numbers do not include human population growth. These are any other living species. So that's a very good point. It may include species that have gone extinct, but then they just become zero. So species are going extinct continuously. So we're losing a lot. I could put also a graph up here that just shows the number of species that go extinct each year that are being tracked. But I do a lot of art to balance out these downward trajectories. It's when I did my master's degree. I did a master's degree in conservation biology, and then I got a second one at the same time in art education because I felt like I needed to create stuff to counterbalance all of this loss. You can go to the next slide. We could talk about that all day. And I also wanted to share with you another aspect of biodiversity that I think is really fascinating and just a quality of our planet. As you all know, one place is not equal to another place. So the colors in this map of the US show where there's higher red colors and tones. This is where, for the species that we know about, these are more threatened species. So you can see California is a huge, there's a lot of endemic species found only in California. So that's why a lot of them are threatened to a higher degree than some of the mountain states. Gray areas have no data about them. And then the green are all the national parks that we have. So I often like to show this map to show where we're missing some significant protection for species, especially along some of the Appalachians and such, that could really use more protection of them given those concentrations of significant threat.
It also shows that national parks work as a conservation tool.
They sure do. They sure do. And they're also cited often in places where there's reason for them to be. So there's a little bit of a causality relationship too, but they do work. There's lots of research to indicate that. You can go move on to the next slide. This is another image that World Wildlife Fund has put together. And this image was put together to help private sector companies in particular understand what are some of the biggest drivers for threats to biodiversity. And so rather than just talking about some of these decreasing trends, it can be helpful to talk about what are some of the things that can be done in response. So land and sea use change, this is the biggest one. This drives a lot of the loss of biodiversity, in particular because it's driving habitat loss and degradation of habitat. So when we get to talking about Jane Goodall, a lot of her research was initiated in Gombe National Park, and a lot of her later work in life was really meant to try to reduce those drivers of habitat loss that were affecting the chimpanzees. But we have pollution, species overexploitation, climate change, also huge as we know, and then invasive species and disease. And because we've talked about trees already and how amazing they are, I'm sure all of you have also witnessed the emerald ash borer and what it's done to our ash tree population in the cities, which breaks my heart. But we know more about it and can actually treat some of the trees now, which is also, I think, pretty amazing. You can go to the next slide. So I have just two really quick examples here to share. I was just at a conference in San Jose in California, and there were two data center operators. One was Microsoft and the other one was a company I hadn't heard of, but the room was packed. It was a room this big and it was full of people who obviously are very concerned about what's happening. But this map shows where 800 hyperscale data centers and 8,600 data centers are globally. This is from 2023. So it's a bit sobering to see where these are and where they're planned to be. And then just a upper Midwest map showing where one data center operator has their data centers located. But the time I spend up in Duluth, there's a community up there. Well, we all are actively fighting a data center that's going in Hermantown right up the hill from Duluth. So this is a big issue around electricity demands to cool these data centers that are being driven by AI and the surge and interest in AI. And
Colleen, would you mind saying a word or two about what a data center is?
Sure. And I acknowledge that this is not my area of a lot of knowledge, but data centers are massive buildings that exist basically to host all of the data that is stored or has to be stored because of the cloud that we all use to operate our phone and our photographs and the videos that we take and all the social media posts that people do. And I think one of the big issues is that consumers, we don't know what the impact is of our use of these things that are being sold to us. But the big problem right now is that with the launch and release, an unregulated release of artificial intelligence in the last couple of years has spawned a need for data centers because there's so much data that is being produced that it has to be hosted somewhere. And so the cloud isn't just a magical cloud, it's actually a physical building, an entity with a lot of infrastructure that takes a lot of electricity just to manage. So to store information takes a lot of electricity and materials and water to cool it. So if you're ever working on a laptop and it feels hot, or your computer feels like it's giving off heat, that's what these centers do. So they're storing all this information electrically, but they're creating a lot of heat. So then water has to be brought in to cool them down. So there's a lot of concern about the use of water in some of these places, and then the pollutants that might be released as a result of the cooling being done, and then water sent back out into the community. And then there's a lot of concern about just the local electrical infrastructure and grid for a lot of communities that aren't built to host such huge buildings. And these are massive. I mean, one data center would occupy this whole campus. So they're just enormous.
Have you seen Cascade?
Oh,
Can you see
I'm
that?
from Iowa and Joe's seen some towns there.
Cascade and Monticello, that's,
Oh, yeah. They're small towns, so why are they got data centers?
They're small towns in part because they don't, because there's space. The land is available to buy up to build these. They also, the people who build them like to have access to water. They like to have access to land. They like to have access to places with enough space that they can actually build more electrical infrastructure to power the center to hold the data. So it's a serious problem.
Well, the other side of it is they sell to the governments. I mean, their pitch to the governments in the small towns is that, you know, you're going to get taxes from us and and people are going to get jobs. But what they don't tell them is the jobs are going to be for building it, and then there's no job. And they usually make an agreement. If we come, you won't tax us at the same rate or at all for X number of years. So there's a whole political problem too.
Yes, there's no shortage of problems related to these data centers. So I mentioned this, and then you can also, Andrea, move on to the next one, because I didn't want to spend the whole time talking about these because they're highly political, they're highly socially contentious, they break communities apart, they suggest they deliver things that they don't. There's a lot happening actually in Minnesota to try to rectify some of the missing legislation to try to put things into place to help communities kind of fight these down the road. And at this meeting I was at last week, Microsoft is talking about some of the technology they're trying to put together to address some of these issues, but there's always a delay. And meanwhile, you can't build trees back where they've been ripped out and destroyed. So it's why I mentioned some of these are just two examples of what's kind of happening right here in the midst of our world. This is where when we were talking about the Mississippi earlier, I just wanted to acknowledge that Minnesota and Wisconsin have some of the most amazing water resources in the world. We have the greatest freshwater lake in the world. 10% of all freshwater on the planet is in Lake Superior, which I just, even as a kid, I always thought that was like the coolest thing. It's right here. And then the Mississippi River. I mean, my gosh. And what I think is so amazing is that the watershed of the Mississippi River covers 40% of the lower 48 states. It's just a huge, huge watershed. And then we've got the Boundary Waters as well that has 1,200 interconnected lakes. So what an amazing place too. All of those threatened by mining and other things as well. I just was reading yesterday that there's also talk of allowing Border Patrol into the Boundary Waters because it's within the boundary of Canada and the US. So who knows, but there's stuff happening as well with some local nonprofit organizations like Save the Boundary Waters. I've been volunteering with Friends of the Boundary Waters. There's also the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. So if you are interested in either of these particular issues, there are ways that you can be involved to help support those particular topics. But now we're going to jump countries, and I'm going to share a little bit about what I was doing with communities in Australia, Aboriginal communities, and they use the term caring for country. This is something that's kind of part of their culture and the terminology that they use. But I just wanted to kind of put that question out there about how relevant is this for us, or how is it relevant to us and everything we're talking about today? So one of the things that I find absolutely phenomenal about Australian Aboriginals in particular is that they have been associated and connected with their land for so many thousands of years that it's imprinted upon them, and they do these incredible bodies of work that are like aerial views of the landscape where they live. But they tell stories as well. So a lot of times there's the water resources tracking through. But if you went in a plane over some of the landscape in Australia, you would recognize what some of the artists have, and especially the female members of the community have very real connections to the landscape because they're out there collecting water, they're figuring out where their food resources are going to come from for the community, and they've got their own sacred business that they collectively engage in. So the artwork is incredible, and one of my favorite, I loved experiencing the art when I was living there, but one of my most favorite experiences with that was going to an art exhibition where there were, I think, 8 to 10 women who had created a painting together that was like the size of this wall, maybe 20 feet long, 12 feet high, and they all contributed to the painting in their different little parts of it. And it was so, so, so beautiful as a finished piece of art. But and just what it represented about the earth and about their land, their country, their culture was, I just thought, so spectacular. So I just wanted to put those in there a little bit as an aside, but if you have an interest in Aboriginal art, that is a sacred connection to the earth. So the work that I was doing with my PhD was trying to increase awareness of Indigenous-led conservation efforts so that governments around the world could more appropriately recognize and give rights to Native and Indigenous populations who've been taking care of the earth for years. And so Australia is a place where the government is trying to work with the communities to help with this recognition. So this map shows everything in red is a kind of recognized Indigenous protected area. So there's likely to be lots more that's not recognized, but there's a lot of tenure disputes and territorial disputes yet. But I think it's really interesting that 1/4 of all of Australia's protected areas are designated to the governance of Indigenous peoples. So it's one of the leading countries by example to show how you can still do all your modern day management of conservation, but you have but you're giving some of that leadership to and sharing that with the Native populations. So next slide. So I was working with one community who was recognized for their role, and they're in the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef on the eastern part of Australia. Maybe if you flip back there, I'll show on the big map. So up, where, like right over here is where the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef is.
Could you describe that with words so folks on Zoom could hear?
Oh, sure.
So maybe like a name, a place
So
name?
about halfway down the east coast is where the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef is.
Thank you.
So the next slide, it shows a map closer up of that area. And then you can go to the next slide. So I was working with one of the Aboriginal elders in the community, actually two of them, one woman and one man, who were well respected by the communities. So we were doing interviews with a lot of the community members of all ages to try to understand what their indicators of their connection to country were, their connections to land. And so we were comparing, like, what are some regular human well-being dimensions that are standard in the literature, and then what's coming out from their view of something similar. So we might say health is one way to measure human well-being, but the indigenous perspective would say our health is represented by being on our land, being present in and connected to our land physically. So that's just a little bit of a background on how we measure these things. So this is Auntie Melinda. She's in all the photos. So I was trying to do some research, but doing it in a way that also really involved the community. So Melinda did all of the interviews with different members of the local community, and they were all together for a weekend celebration together on one piece of land that they all knew really well. So we collected a lot of interviews and had some great conversations and some good laughs, and that's kind of the basis of the data collection that we had. And then I spent some time with some of the Aboriginal rangers, the Gadargil Rangers, that was the local name of the community. And so they would spend a lot of time out in the field doing some monitoring that then connected to how the other protected areas around Australia were being monitored. And so one night I went out with them to count sea turtle eggs that were being laid by different loggerhead and different green and other sea turtles on the coast. And I just was so touched by these rangers. They were all men who were doing this evening, and they were so gentle. So what you do to monitor the nests laid by these sea turtles is first watch the sea turtle come up out of the water, dig a hole, deposit their eggs, they bury it again, and then they go back into the ocean. So the rangers will watch all that, and then they mark where the nest is, and then they go move the sand away from the nest, and then they pull out and they're like the size of a ping pong ball, and they're really leathery and they're really soft. And so they pull them out and they line them all up, and they're going to measure the diameter of all of them. They do a few different measurements just to keep track of how many eggs are being laid and the quality of them and all, size of them. And then they put them all back in the nest, arranged in the same way that they were pulled out, just to not disturb anything. And it's also important that they go back in the right order, because temperature influences the gender of sea turtles. I don't know if you know that, but lots of super cool stuff around the biology of these amazing creatures. So it was such an honor to spend time with them, and they were so very welcoming. Some of the other, you can change the slide, Andrea. Another great experience that I had was going to the Garma Festival, which happens every year up in Arnhem Land at the very north of Australia. And it's very remote, and it's an area where all of the native languages are spoken as their primary language. And a lot of them may not speak English or just very little, but they host a week where they just have these dance-offs between the different tribes. They have an art show of their native art in the woods, lit by the moon, and they take people on walks and they sing and they play music, and they're so fun and they're so funny, and they allow people to join them. You don't need to be Aboriginal to participate. It just is a little hard to get there. You have to be willing to, you know, have spiders and snakes and all that stuff around. But it's pretty amazing. It's just another kind of learning opportunity to observe how they are so closely connected to their land. Next slide. And the other thing that I thought was so wonderful about that experience is the community up there. There's another community up there of Aboriginal Rangers who has an Indigenous protected area. And they were launching a new management plan for that protected area that they worked really hard on. And it's recognized again by the national government. But they had a ceremony to launch this management plan. And I mean, other protected areas don't do this in your mainstream government. And I thought, oh, maybe they should. It was so wonderful. Like they have a dedicated social ranger who just watches and manages and monitors social aspects of the protected area. And I think you actually have that in the National Park Service here. It was always intended for, you know, people and nature, but I think people don't always recognize that. But this was just an incredible ceremony, again, with music and dance and drums and ceremony to acknowledge that they just got through a big hurdle of figuring out how they were going to care for in a plan that is not something they traditionally would have done, but it's part of their, you know, kind of modern engagement with the Australian government. So this is when Melinda was doing all the interviews in that slide I showed you. This is like, for my research, I had to, and thankfully I had enough money in my budget to pay someone to do all the transcription of all of those hours of audio and video. But then I also had to go through and code lots of different segments of the interviews to try to pull out some of the kind of themes and insights for how to analyze what was found in some of this research outside. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing, because I'm so very visual and I think maps are so interesting. And so I wasn't originally planning to do this, but as we were doing these interviews with some of the different younger generation and then some of the older community members as well, I started hearing things in the interviews that were different in between the generations. So what I did with some of the results of the research is look at and break up kind of age 20 to 40 and then 50 to 80 years and kind of bucketed them to see what was coming out in terms of the knowledge of place between the younger generation and the older generation. And because this wasn't like a main part of my research, I didn't dig too much into this, but I just thought it was an interesting exercise to kind of see where a lot of the older generation on the right was spending more time. And they were talking about this, and they were talking about some of the food resources and some of the ceremony and some of the connection and tradition that they had to those places. And then looking at where some of the younger ones are spending their time. And a lot of them were talking about how there's fences up and there's blockades to some of these places that they traditionally would have been going to that their parents and their grandparents and others had been to. So it's just a really interesting way to think about the damage that's being done to culture in addition to the environment by putting up barriers and keeping people from those places that they're so spiritually and culturally connected to. So I'm just looking at the time. I think maybe in another 10 minutes, what do you think, Andrea? Do you think there's enough time? Or 8 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So what I thought might be interesting, because there's a lot that you've been talking about already in all the weeks leading to now, but I know also there's some kind of insights too from the readings about what kind of actions we can take. So I would love people to walk away from this feeling like there are things you can do. And I know you will all already do so many things in your lives, but in small groups. So I think just like in your table groups and then online as well, there's a couple of scenarios here that I thought might be interesting to discuss with others. This first one is let's say that you have a goal to cut in half your consumption of plastic, packaging, or new products. So what are some of those actions you might take to reach your goal? And maybe you have a goal to have to do even more than 50%. Maybe you want to do 80% or 90%. What are you paying attention to? What is hard and what is easier? And then the other scenario, and I know both of these they're drawn from real life. So in this one, you might have a niece or a nephew or a younger friend who's having a hard time finding hope for the future because of what's happening to our planet. And in this case, climate change related disasters in the news that we're seeing all the time. So what gives you hope, and how can you share this with this kind of younger generation? So I think if we take maybe 8 minutes, so till 7, and then that gives us enough time to finish up with Jane Goodall. So pick one or both of those, depending on how much time you have. But as long as everyone in the group has a chance to think about what you do or what you'd like to do, what you think would be helpful in a situation like this, and then also with this generation that might need a little bit more hope, what might you suggest they do? And what gives you hope?
Okay, I'm opening the rooms.
Hi.
Hi.
My connection dropped right before you put people into rooms. Can you put me in a room or not?
Yeah, and I'm not in a room either.
Oh.
They're trying, yeah.
All right, we have all our Zoom folks back.
It's an intense concentration of humans.
Once again, gonna ask if anyone wants to share any thoughts about what you discussed in your groups online or in the room.
Let's start online. How about Zoom folks? Who wants to share from Zoom?
We had a very interesting, nice conversation at our table and she's willing to share her thoughts.
All right.
She
Well,
did-
let's go with this then. We have a volunteer in the room.
Over the years, I have paid attention to these kinds of conversations coming from many, many directions. And I had a dream image of several years ago, actually. And it was just an image and it lasted 10 seconds. Woke up on a Sunday morning and it was a hand with holding like a bow and arrow, pulling the string backwards. And the words were in my head. In order for the arrow to fly forward, the bowstring has to be pulled backwards. And that's what we're watching right now. This is not a random thing that's happening. This is all connected and it's global. And it's, what's helping and what's not. We got to figure all that out. And that's the beginning of any kind of change like that, is to assess what do we keep from the old that's still working and what do we pitch because it's destructive. And I think that's the part that we're in right now.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that deep thought and image insight. Is there anyone online who has anything you want to share as well?
Oh, Marilyn and Catherine.
Marilyn,
What?
let's hear you, and Catherine.
I'm so old that I can remember what it was like before there was any plastic. And things like you took your Sunday newspaper and you folded it all in one or two layer sheets, and they had a whole pile of that. And then whenever you had any, waste to get rid of, like peelings from carrots and apples and all that, you threw it on a sheet of paper, rolled it up, and threw it away, and that was just your way of life. And I think there were all kinds of examples that I could give where it was a part of things that everybody did, especially during World War II. Saving the cans for tin and a special thing. And if you bought a jar of peaches, you had to bring a jar back to get another jar of peaches and all that. And these are things that if you wrote them all down, some of them could be hard to implement and other ones would be possible. And that's just my idea, like building on what Katie said.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Marilyn. Catherine, did you want to add anything?
Oh, I was just gonna plug using laundry detergent sheets and not liquid. It makes a huge difference in the amount of plastic you consume. If you haven't tried that, I'd be happy to recommend the brand I use, but I know I shouldn't advertise.
Tell us. I'll recommend.
What is it, Catherine? They want to know.
I've tried like 3 different kinds, and the kind I keep buying over and over again is called Clean People.
Clean People.
Yes.
Laundry sheets. Thank
Laundry
you
sheets.
for sharing that.
Well, and then if you use dryer sheets, you just don't have, and if you use like something like OxyClean that comes in a cardboard box instead of a plastic thing, where you buy enough OxyClean for like 5 years at one time. No, I'm kidding. But it really does make a difference. So
Yeah, that's a very, very important point, that everything you do does make a difference. So it can be quite easy, and I find myself also sometimes getting a bit overwhelmed by this pickle that we're in. again, it's why I like to do art and paint and sketch and things. Oh, yes, go ahead.
I have a question about the recycling of plastics. Now, we were at a family reunion and we were drinking out of cans, cooking and opening cans and drinking out of aluminum cans and that sort of thing. And the comment was made that plastic recycling is not done well. It's not efficient. Can you comment on that as far as, I know that glass is very recyclable and metal is very recyclable. Comment on plastic recycling.
Sure, and then I'll take us off of that topic so that we can talk about Jane and Hope. But yes, there are a range of statistics around recycling of plastic, and that I think it's somewhere between 3 and 9% nationally on average of the products that are created that could be recycled are actually recycled. And it doesn't even mean that they're not like sent to a recycling center, but there's issues at the recycling center that can't handle that, or it's contaminated because it's mixed, or it hasn't been cleaned properly, or the machinery is having a rough time with it. Black plastic is known for not being recyclable at all. And so it's really, really challenging. One little light of hope I can give you is that there are a few states right now who have a policy in place that charges companies for all of the products that they sell that and the equivalent of plastic required to package or produce them or mail them or whatnot. So it puts a little bit more money on the responsibility of the producer that then is supposed to be increasing the infrastructure of the recycling facilities in the states where this is enacted. And I know it's in Oregon, it's in California right now, which will start in January, and then maybe Michigan. But I know there's a number of states, including Minnesota, who are looking to do this in the near future as well. Again, I'm not the expert on this, but I was just in California, and it is something that is on everyone's mind because it's going to cost something to someone. And unfortunately, sometimes that cost gets passed then to the consumer. So I think it's always in our best interest to rely on purchasing things as little as possible. So I love all of those of you who've been around for so long that you know how to clean things with just the stuff you have in your cupboard, and you don't need to go out and buy chemicals and all sorts of other things. There's so much stuff that we just don't need. And when we don't buy it and we don't need it, we realize we don't need it, then they don't make it because it's not being bought. So there's a lot of stuff around that can be done, and happy to talk about that another time, but I really want to get on to Jane.
It's a number one.
So
it can be recycled. Black plastic.
I just want to talk a little bit about the impacts of Jane's research and her message about hope. So you can go on to the next slide. It's just so incredibly poignant and sad but meaningful that Jane just passed away, and it was October 3rd or something.
Like a month exactly, almost.
It just, yeah. So Andrea and I were talking, like, I think right after her death, about what I might be presenting on, and I was just like, how about Jane? Like, she's always so relevant, but especially now. So I'm not gonna take the time right now to show you these, but I picked out a few videos. So again, you'll get the slide deck and so you can look at these all yourselves. They're 3 minutes or less, so super short. If you want to learn a little bit more about Jane, I just love seeing her. I love the real footage of her and her work in her earlier years and now. There's been a couple National Geographic films made about Jane, including the more recent one that I think was in 2013, which is also fantastic. It was out in the major theaters. This is also the On Being project I imagine you all know about. But this is I just listened to this one recently, and I think it was from an interview with Jane in 2020, so not that long ago. But during the pandemic, and it's funny because when I started going back and looking at videos and interviews to prepare for this, it's funny how many times Jane has to say the same thing to a million people who ask her the same question over and over and over again. But this interview was so good because I heard her talking about and reflecting and saying things that I hadn't heard in some of the other places. So I highly recommend that one. But also just the movies, which are just so good. So you can go to the next slide. And just for a super quick recap for in case you don't know about Jane or much about her, she's wonderfully British. She studied chimp behavior under Louis Leakey, who is a famed anthropologist studying humans, but he was interested in just figuring out other ways of seeing humanity. And so he had Jane go to Gombe National Park in Tanzania when she was 26. And I love this, that she couldn't go by herself. So she needed someone to go with her. And her mother was always very supportive of what she wanted to do. Even as a child, she's told her mom she wanted to go study chimpanzees because she loved animals. And so her mom went with her to the field to spend, I think, 6 months with her while she was just starting to study the chimps. And she ran into a lot of frustrations and challenges and things. And she'd go back to camp and her mom would just say, well, go back out there, and was very encouraging. So the landmark discovery that kind of changed the world and the way that humans actually see themselves was Jane's discovery of the use of tools by chimpanzees. So up until that point, and this is where I think a lot like Aboriginals and a lot of Indigenous communities probably knew and had seen this and understood this and were aware of this, but for kind of Western civilization, this was the first time that they acknowledged that there was this kind of higher level awareness and learning and capacity and intelligence in other beings besides humans. So, but because Jane did not have her PhD yet, she wasn't really taken seriously. And people were telling her, no, you should not be naming those chimpanzees. They should have numbers because that's how you do proper research. So Lewis helped her get her PhD at Cambridge University so that she could actually be taken seriously. And then that's when her science and her research really did get out there and started changing what we know about the world. And what I really, really, really love about Jane is that she did all of that like when she was really young, in her mid-20s. And then she went back and studied here and there, but for the most part, for the bulk of her life, she focused on supporting local people. She developed a program called Roots and Shoots for the youth. And when I first saw her in 2015, she had just written this book called Reason for Hope, a spiritual journey. And when the day that she died, I was like, I know I have a book of Jane's. And I looked over at the shelf and it was sitting on the shelf, like within arm's reach. I was sitting at my laptop and I just went boom, and Jane's book was in my hand. And then I opened it up and I have it inscribed from her for Colleen, Follow Your Heart, Jane Goodall. And I just sat there with this book just going, I forgot that I was able to meet her and have her sign this, and so I brought it just in case anyone wants to like see it. Her handwriting, and I'll just mark the page with the bookmark. And I'll pass it around if you do want to see it. So what I loved about Jane when I first met her was that she travels 300 days out of the year to do her job. She, into her early 90s, I mean, she died while working on a road trip to go meet another one of her youth groups that she was working with. So her life was focused on outreach and trying to change our understanding. Oh, and here I have it right here, October 1st, not the 3rd. So just an incredible, powerful, resilient, strong, passionate woman who believed so much in this that her whole life she was away from home. She was out there answering the same questions over and over and over again and constantly talking about hope. So you can, so I won't read through all of these, but I pulled these out because I thought these were some good ones, some quotes about Jane. And because she just passed away, there are so many different resources online if you do want to learn a little bit more about her. But these were some that I thought were really great, kind of talking about like this one. People should think about the consequences of the little choices they make each day. And this is what Jane really focused on. She really focused on the message that you can do something. It doesn't matter who you are, how small you are, how big you are, how smart you are, how little you are. You can do something. And then she talks about how there's reasons for hope because every day someone's doing something. And she talks about the young people everywhere she goes. They're excited and empowered. Although this was a little bit wild. A little bit of a dated quote, but she still talks about that, like the need for hope. And then she talks about, you know, when looking into the eyes of a chimpanzee, she sees someone that has a personality, that they're thinking and they're reasoning and they're looking back at us. I don't know if you've ever been to the gorilla exhibit at Como Zoo, but I have a hard time going there because when I look at those gorillas, it looks like there's a person sitting in this cage. And so I think this is what Jane, you know, is really talking about. So we need to recognize human rights. We also need to recognize the rights of the great apes. And this is another hopeful thing that I think the world is managing right now is that there are fights going on for the rights of nature around the world. So there's the rights of rivers, there's the rights of there's one company that I had researched that had nature was on the board. So they always had to make sure when they were making decisions on the board that nature had a say too. I actually wanted to go to a board meeting to figure out how that worked, but I can do the next. So the book that's going around, this is a quote from her book, Reason for Hope, A Spiritual Journey. And again, it's a pretty long quote, so I won't read the whole thing, but we'll just start with this. Lost in awe at the beauty around me, I must have slipped into a state of heightened awareness. It is hard, impossible really, to put into words the moment of truth that suddenly came upon me then. Even the mystics are unable to describe their brief flashes of spiritual ecstasy. It seemed to me as I struggled afterward to recall the experience, the self was utterly absent. I and the chimpanzees, the earth and trees and air seemed to merge, seemed to become one with the power, the spirit power of life itself. So it's just, that's that book, that's the writing. It's a beautiful book. Just so much beauty in the way that she writes, and she describes her experience of working with the chimpanzees, and she's writing about this years after she was there, and just that experience affected and informed her choice of work for her entire life, which I just think is amazing.
I think it would be worth reading that second portion too, because it reminds me, anybody who took the Beatrice Buteau class, think about that as well when you hear this section, because I feel some resonance.
Okay, anyone want to read the second paragraph for us?
I'll be glad to.
Okay.
That afternoon, it had been as though an unseen hand had drawn back a curtain, and for the briefest moment, I had seen through such a window. In a flash of outsight, I had known timelessness and quiet ecstasy, sensed a truth of which mainstream science is merely a small fraction. And I knew that the revelation would be with me for the rest of my life, imperfectly remembered, yet always within, a source of strength on which I could draw when life seemed harsh or cruel or desperate.
Thank you. Just to round it out, anyone would like to read the third paragraph for us? Okay, I'll read it. All the time I was getting closer to animals and nature, and as a result, closer to myself and more in tune with the spiritual power that I felt all around. For those who have experienced the joy of being alone with nature, there is really little need to say more. For those who have not, no words of mine can ever describe the powerful, almost mystical knowledge of beauty and eternity that come suddenly and all unexpected. So, amen to that. It just ties through to what we started out in the reading.
Well, she says almost mystical here, like twice. That's mysticism. That's mystical. I mean, if that's not mystical, what is?
Yeah.
Great, you can move to the next. So, we only have 7 minutes left. So, which is enough time to have a little bit of a discussion about this, but these were some questions that I was thinking about to kind of wrap up today's session. The first is, what resonated with you from what you read, heard, or shared this week and today? Is there an action, thought, or inspiration you want to carry with you into the week ahead or the year ahead, based on what we were just talking about a few minutes ago? Where does hope show up in nature? And what questions do you have about today's topic? So we have about 6 minutes left. I'm going to open that up to anyone online or in the room and any of those questions. Or your own questions while we have a little bit of time left.
Well, I'll jump in here, Colleen. It was fabulous. It's Annie online. I'm taking this Earth law class for all, and it's what you're talking about, but it's giving personhood to rivers and trees, and we know that the EPA is protecting people and corporations, but this is a new area of law, and it gives me hope. It's an uphill battle. But like Sister Marguerite in our chapter was saying that it's just not human, it's all species who are together and they need rights. So anyway, thank you. And they were saying that there was one quote by an indigenous, and I don't know her name right now, but she said that an ounce of water will cost more than an ounce of gold in years to come. That was her prophecy. So good thing you're up in Duluth.
Shwetaman, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm always impressed by the ability of nature to rebound, to manage with a little. You set aside a little land here and there, and flowers pop up, birds appear. And when we set aside a small area to try to preserve species, how they can respond. So that resilience in nature, despite all the hassles it faces, gives me hope.
Thanks so much, Peg. Having been out to your land where you're doing all that restoration, it's effort, it's work, but it is a payoff. And as you say, nature is very resilient indeed.
And you know, I love nature and I'm pleased with what you've said tonight, but everything seems so big. You know, we're talking about these data centers and they just go in and build them. And there's no government that regulates that. And so we have this unfortunate political system. So it's just a lot. And when you think about what can I do? Well, I can do this and I can do that. And Susan was reminding us about all that Carondelet Village does, the Carondelet Center, you know, with the Radiant Heat and so forth. And that's a beautiful example, but it's one small example. And so I keep waiting to hear what can we practically do to question this big picture. I feel like a lot.
I think the big picture is all the little pieces, and somebody else must know the specific statistics. I cannot remember like what percentage of the population would have to change, and it's something like 26%. Or I mean, that's you know, what
critical mass.
Yeah, but it's a real low percentage. Around 20%. What?
3.5.
3.5?
To change an idea.
Okay.
Is in the population.
So if any one of us is doing any one little thing, the title that I read about that I just loved was, so you get a couple more people and then that little group is doing something. And she called it a pocket of promise. And they are all over the world. It isn't like we aren't connected that we know about by phone or even email or whatever, but the energy of that group all over this little group, those pockets of promise, if we only need 2.3% or something, 2.5, 3.5. Okay. Anyway, I just think we can do it with, don't disparage what any little action can be.
Hello, this is Bridget speaking. I was gonna comment about, I heard a man talking he was, learning from Native leaders here in the Twin Cities about a prophecy that they were speaking about around staying close to the earth, and that like there will be sort of divergent paths, and so that to me gave me hope around, I don't have to solve, or like I can let go of solving the whole problem. And I can let go of like, there might be a lot of people that are going to go in another direction that I'm not going, but I'm going to keep going towards the earth. And I'm just going to keep doing what I can do to go towards that and get people to come with me and just focus on that.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful segue of comments over to that and the theme of today too, just that sacred connection to the earth. And I do think that's where ultimately we'll be going in the future as water becomes more valuable than gold, and it becomes the most essential commodity. Water is life. So we need that. But I think the examples of pockets of promise, pockets of prairie, pockets of gardens, and for pollinators and all of this, you can even have container garden and attract these things and help support nature. So I think as Jane messages and shares around the world and had for decades. And she's creating these roots and shoots youth who are coming up with senses of hope too, to do something. The most important thing is to do something and to know that you're not the only one doing it. I think that's what helps me sleep at night, is that I don't have to solve all this myself. It took me a long time to figure that out, but I also just recently learned how to garden because I'd been living other places and traveling my whole life. But after that work with the Aboriginal communities, everyone talks about family. Everyone talks about their country. And I thought, well, I want to go back to my family and I want a piece of the earth to cultivate and take care of and steward. And so it's a little backyard garden, but I planted as many trees as I can on it. And so I think just acknowledging and remembering that we all have the capacity to do something, and that's better than nothing. I'm just gonna show them what I have in the slide, so because I think it's a little bit relevant to this, and I'm so sorry we're at time, but I just wanted to show you one other resource. If it would be helpful to you, so this is a creative exercise, and as I mentioned earlier, like sometimes I found personally it helps me to create things to kind of combat that sense of loss. So I have taught, recently I was doing some collage making class to help kind of in a community setting, let people, kind of like the approach of a sewing circle or a quilting circle or something, but just using recycled materials to create something to represent hope. If we had another hour, I would have had you do something like that, but you can do that at home. I'm sure you all have materials you can use to stick together. And then there's another slide here. Well, some examples of some collages that I think are pretty fun too. You can just go through all of those. I think there's a couple more, Andrea. And one more, might be two more. Yeah, and then the last. So, and then this is something this is a big list of collective ideas for action. So also if we had more time, we could have added to these, but this is something, and I'm sorry, it's such tiny.
I'll put it on the big screen.
Right, there we go. So just some things like allow your trees to decay, because we have woodpeckers, we have birds, we have insects and bugs that need these decaying trees to grow in and thrive in. Don't rake your leaves in your yard. Let your neighbors know not to do that. I see lots of social media about this, but we're living in an age of disinformation. So anytime you can just say it again, like Jane saying it, how many times has she mentioned take action in her life? I can't even count. But there's also lots of things you can teach. You can join some of these NGOs. There's some amazing NGOs right here in the cities, like Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, Friends of Boundary Waters that I mentioned. Annie was talking about a class that she's taking. There's also I love birds, and there's some really cool bird counts that are citizen bird counts, especially around Christmas time. They do this annually. You could run for office. You could support policy development. Call your representatives. Oh my gosh, call them every day until they recognize your phone number. And then go to community meetings. There's lots of things. So there's just some ideas here, but you'll have that in the slides. And if you are feeling at a point where you need some ideas, just pull that up and add to it. But I just want to make sure you knew that was in there. And then here's my information, and I always invite someone to, sometimes you need to be accountable for what you say you're going to do. So if there's something you want to do and you want to share it, just send a picture or a note about that. So, but thank you so much for engaging on a super important topic.
Thank you, Colleen.
That was amazing. Thank you. And everybody, we'll see you next week. Joan is going to be presenting. She's been reading a lot of Toni Morrison, so it's going to be a good class.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
The catalyst for creative union and divine love. What I did